here's a question for you. I mean, I feel like I know the answer, but hearing you explain it, I think would be helpful to me and just interesting. Um, Yet, despite everything you just said, I mean, would you identify yourself as a progressive? And if so, is your version of would you allow that your vision of what progress is very different from what almost everyone who might identify as your ally would believe? In the sense that I would guess that your definition of progress is something very provisional and saying you would confidently say that progress is what I think progress is, and therefore that's what makes me a progressive because I'm for changing things, but I have no ultimate truth claim to any of it. Is that right? I mean, how would you
It's
how would you do
interesting.
that?
It's an interesting question, and I wonder what I mean. Do you think I'm a progressive?
I mean, I've always had my doubts.
Okay, I'll here. This is let me give it a shot.
Yeah.
I do self-identify, if pushed, as a progressive. I mean, people don't ask me the question all that much anymore because they're like, we lost him.
We lost
He's
him
done.
a while ago. Yeah.
Forget about it. I have my views about how society can progress. I think progress is possible. I think, first of all, I define progress in a different way than a lot of people. But secondly, I don't think there's anything absolute about my conception of progress, which you sort of alluded to, that I'm very skeptical of absolute truth claims. Now, I do believe in absolute truth in a kind of ultimate sense. So I'm not a moral relativist. I am accused of being a moral relativist. But for example, I do believe that God exists, and I believe there is a kind of order that derives from God. Maybe order is not the right word. I don't mean to suggest that in a kind of integralist sense, but I do think there is a kind of logic to the universe, and that ultimately derives from a higher power. I do believe that some things are true. So I'm a believer. So I'm Muslim. So I believe there are, various things that are true about Islam from a creedal standpoint, so on and so forth. So I'm not someone who says that all religions are equally valid. I think, so for example, do I think that, I hope this doesn't get me into trouble, do I think that Buddhism is equally valid to Islam? No. Does that mean I think Buddhism is bad? No. But I'm not going to pretend that they are equivalent from my standpoint. Now, it's also odd that I would even be worried that would be controversial. I assume in some progressive circles, being explicit about that might be controversial. That, I have judgments about what is more right or less right on a kind of relative spectrum, right? But I just don't think those questions really have to be resolved in this world. And I don't think it's the job of democracy to come to some final answer or conclusion or consensus about how society should be ordered. That's what I'm skeptical about. And that's why, so for example, I do think that government should have a pretty significant role in the economy. And that's what, I'm not a socialist by any means, but I'm sympathetic to how someone like Bernie Sanders viewed the economy and using government power in an interventionist way to address inequality. I think that's important because I see inequality as being one of the sources of our modern ills. That said, I also don't have a problem if the Bernie party, or in this case, the Democratic Party, if Bernie had won, if they had lost after 4 years or after 8 years, I would say, hey, the Bernie-led Democratic Party is not an absolute truth. It's something that is subject to the ebbs and flows of the democratic process. So if after 8 years Republicans win, then it's completely legitimate for them to try to undo what Bernie did. And that's how democracy works. Different parties come into power and they try to undo what the other did. Of course, they have to do so through peaceful, legal, democratic means. So they can't just make America into a dictatorship and then say, hey, we're everything Bernie did, now we're taking over and we're going to go outside the law. And I don't even know how that would really work in the US context. But anyway, the point is, I don't think that any absolute endpoints or final victories are possible in this world. And I think I've come to terms with that. I've come to terms with the contingency of human life in a way that I hadn't really been fully cognizant of before. So if you had talked to me 10 years ago, I wouldn't say what I'm saying now.